So now that we have gotten all of that out of the way, we're going to go over, we're going to go through not as loaded as last week, but still some interesting topics as far as new fight announcements are concerned in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. First off, obviously, we had the Jared Brooks fill-in for UFC 228 as well as Brandon Davis, and we've talked about that. But moving forward, a week past in Moscow, Claudio Silva out against Ramazan Emeev. I don't see them finding anyone to replace Claudio Silva and fight, a fellow guy from that region in that time. I have a feeling he's not going to get a fight. And then as of today, I saw CB Dalloway has a new opponent with Omari Akhmedov out. He draws the M1 middleweight champion Artem Frolov.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I love international MMA. I'm huge on it. I mean, if you pay attention to Fight Night picks, I watch a lot of M1. ACB is one of my favorite organizations to watch, as well KSW and Cage Warriors. And let me tell you, Artem Frolov's legit, man. He's Absolutely. Such a good fighter, and that's great. And I think that UFC Moscow, while everybody really wanted to see Conor McGregor fighting Khabib at home, it didn't make sense for a fight night. But this is a really good card, and I'm really excited to also see Nikita Krylov making his return, coming back from Fight Nights Global, taking on Jan Blachowicz.
There are a lot of things to like about that card, in my opinion, and I'm with you. I'm a big international MMA guy as well. I'll actually be covering ACB this weekend for the MMAtakeover.com. You guys can check that out whenever it's there. 3 title fights, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and that should be a good one. UFC Fight Night 137 will take place on September 22nd. There's been a big-time shuffle and a lot of additions, somewhat late notice, given the fact that we have all of these Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series Brazil fighters coming in here. So the first one, obviously, Antonio Carlos Jr. and Elias Teodoro is off of that card, but it'll be rescheduled for UFC 231. And then a 3-pack came into the light for this week, a really random lightweight matchup between Charles Oliveira and Christos. How do you say his last name? Giagos?
I'd have to bring it up.
Christos Giagos. That fight to me was very random. I didn't see that coming. And then Mayra Bueno Silva, who is a top women's flyweight prospect from Brazil, she'll get Jillian Robertson, who was the first girl to go 2-0 off of the last Ultimate Fighter season. And then Chase Sherman will have to walk into enemy territory to take on another guy off of the Contender Series Brazil, Augusto Sakai.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of, I think, missed that almost, like the Sakai-Chase Sherman fight. I think it really flew under the radar. And there's a lot of Chase Sherman fans out there. They love the gifts. And I just noticed that he was actually sponsored by a gift company. So good for Chase Sherman for using his influence to get some sponsorships like that. But one of the big fight announcements that you had mentioned from the outset, and if we can back up to it for just a second, Elias Theodorou. Man, I think an Eric Anders fight could happen. I know it's kind of short notice, but at the same time, Anders called out Theodorou, and then he said, oh, it was a dick move, or whatever word he decided to use. He said, it wasn't a smart move on my part. The guy's already got a fight. But yeah, Eric Anders, Elias Theodorou, that would have been a good fight. But yeah, of course, it got rescheduled, and he's going to fight Shoeface at UFC 231. Hopefully I can be there in Toronto.
That would be an awesome event to be at. Though UFC 229 is this year's most exclusive party from what it seems, and it got another edition this week in the aforementioned, as you have brought up multiple times, Tanya Evinger. She will be in the blue corner against number 9 ranked Aspen Ladd.
Yeah, I mean, Tanya Evinger was supposed to be competing on the Sao Paulo card against Ketlin Vieira, and now we see she's drawing Aspen Ladd, who had to pull out of her last fight. So she's going to be back. Tanya Evinger competing at bantamweight for the first time in the UFC. That's going to be a really interesting matchup. A lot of people sleep on Tanya Evinger. She really gave it to Chris Cyborg. I mean, she stuck around in that fight. We haven't seen a lot of fighters stick around like that. She had a really great run when she was in Invicta, win over Yana Kunitskaya, and I believe it was a no contest. I think she went 7-0-1 in Invicta, and was their bantamweight champ for a long time. So she's drawing a tough up-and-comer in Aspen Ladd, somebody that the UFC's put a lot of stock in. It should be a good fight.
So then UFC Fight Night 138 in Moncton.
Holla.
I would be very jealous, or I am very jealous that you're going to see this fight. This fight for me is phenomenal between two guys making their debut, Tay Edwards and Don Madge, who have a knack of finishing guys and finishing them pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about international events. Don Madge is one of those guys that I've had on my radar. Had a chance to talk to former EFC welterweight champ Dricus du Plessis in the past. He's competing with KSW right now. He's their welterweight champ. But Don Madge had a good run in EFC, wins over Dave Mazzani, to name a few, and really, really good having him. And it should be a great fight against Tay Edwards, somebody who a lot of people are high on right now.
Trio of featherweight matchups added to UFC 230, and in an event that we are kind of, at least me, I'm kind of looking at UFC 230 at this point, kind of being like, we got all those big fights kind of announced originally, and now it's
just make one of them a main event. Just make any one of those a main event. It's fine for me. I love it. I think it's a great card. I don't know why people are looking for John Jones and Gustafsson, or Gustafsson DC, or any combination of the three. Just make one of those ones the main event. They're all good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have to say, as far as like how stacked these cards at MSG have been in the past, personally, I like this card a lot. I think there are some fantastic matchups on it, but it might not have the like big name allure, which is something I still think is overrated as far as fight cards are concerned, as maybe years past. But a trio of featherweight fights have been kind of added this week. You got Shane Burgos and Kurt Hollabaugh, which I'm excited about. Julio Arce, who's looked phenomenal in his two fights, up against Shaman Moraes. And then actually just brought up here about an hour ago, thanks to Mark LaMonica of Newsday, you got Jason Knight taking on Jordan Rinaldi, dropping from 155.
That should be a good fight. I like watching Jason Knight fight. Great on the ground. Jordan Rinaldi was a guy that the UFC were really high on until he fought
Gregor Gillespie.
Gregor Gillespie, exactly. And that's a guy that I'm really excited about to watch fight. I mean, it was a pick'em for me between him and Vince from Hell Pichel in his last fight. But yeah, great fighter there. Moraes is another guy. He's pretty special. Had a couple of what was it, eye pokes or cup checks in his last fight that were you kind of wonder about it. But yeah, that card's really shaping up to be a good one. Arce, I was able to see at UFC 220. Shane Burgos against Calvin Kattar, which of course the fight didn't go his way, but he's a special talent, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Moving on to the 25th anniversary celebration at UFC Fight Night 139 in Denver. You get the addition of a featherweight bout between, and it shows how much stock they put in Bobby Moffett, giving him a guy that has a relatively solid record in the UFC, and Chaz Skelly.
Yeah, Chaz Skelly's a tough out for anybody, and that's a tough fight for Moffett. I
agree. And UFC Fight Night 140 in Buenos Aires, their Argentinian debut. You get a trio of new fights announced this week as well. Khalil Roundtree Jr. against another Brazilian Contender Series signee, Johnny Walker. Marina Moros will move up to 125 from strawweight. She'll take on Veronica Macedo, who was just in the fight of the night against Andrea Lee. I always mix Angela and Andrea Lee up, man. I always mix them up. And just announced too, just like literally about an hour ago, Michel Prazeres staying up at welterweight. He'll take on Bartosz Fabinski.
Yeah, that Fabinski fight's going to be really good. That's another one of those guys. I had a conversation before we came on. UFC Hamburg, say what you will about all the decisions and whatnot. I love that card. I thought it was so good. It was like an amalgamation of almost Europe's Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. It was like everybody from around Europe that you should be watching. Make sure you watch this. And it was a great card. Now, Michael Prazeres, I know there were extenuating circumstances around him missing weight against Desmond Green. And while I don't agree with that fight, I think it's good that he's, sticking around at welterweight.
Yeah, I agree too. He had a bunch of weight management issues in the past with that. And I think that he proved, to me at least, against a guy like Zach Cummings, that he could stick around.
Yep.
The Ultimate Fighter 28 finale gets a welterweight edition, as Tim Means will take on Ricky Rainey.
The Dirty Bird back in the ring.
I like that. I like that fight a lot. I think that's a fight that could fly under the radar. UFC Fight Night 142, not a whole lot of volume as far as fights being thrown out as official this week, but we did get the biggest one of them all. The main event is going to be Junior Dos Santos and the hometown favorite, Tai Tuivasa.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, realistically, if you're Junior Dos Santos, where do you go from here? He believes he can be a title challenger once again. I think in his last fight, I was really excited for that fight. I thought it was going to be a coming out party, not for him, but for his opponent. And neither one of them really able to get it done. And yeah, as far as Tai Tuivasa, I wonder personally, what's his ceiling? Where does he fit in this division? I mean, he's fought well against some different opponents, I guess. I mean, got the win over Arlovsky, and say what you will about that one. I mean, I thought Arlovsky was on a little bit of an upswing with his decision win. So yeah, really interesting stuff for Junior Dos Santos.
UFC 231 in your home nation of Canada is going to get a fight that I think is going to be awesome at featherweight between Hakeem Dawodu and Kyle Bochniak. And earlier today at light heavyweight, we get Alexander Rakic and Devin Clark. Alexander Rakic, a guy that looks terrifying.
Rakic, another guy from that UFC Hamburg card. And if you missed it, go back and watch it, because that guy's something special. And then as far as the Bochniak fight, yeah, Hakeem Dawodu in his last fight finally able to kind of get back to where he was before, his former glory. And in the fight before that, obviously got finished and really surprised a lot of people. So that should be a barn burner of a fight.
Then at UFC on Fox 31, another couple of interesting fights that I saw come out this week for Milwaukee. Jack Hermanson and Gerald Meerschaert is a fight that I do not think should be overlooked, as well as Drakkar Klose and Bobby Green.
Yeah, as far as Hermanson and Meerschaert are concerned, I actually got to see them both fight, behind me at UFC in Halifax. Obviously different opponents, but those two guys, I seem to get them mixed up in my head every now and again. So that should be a good one. Meerschaert's last fight was kind of a knock him out, come from behind type of win. It was pretty cool. Ultimate Fighter season 28 finale. And yeah, I mean, there's so much good MMA coming up to the tail end of this year. I thought kind of maybe UFC 225 or 226. That was kind of the be all end all when you finally had DC fighting Stipe. That's it. That's it. Pack it up for the rest of the year. Who cares? But I mean, Khabib, Conor, among others, there's a lot of great cards coming up.
I know, man. I can't wait. And one of them to kind of lead us towards the end is going to be UFC 232 in Vegas on December 29th. And a couple of interesting matchups there. On that was a potential UFC flyweight eliminator between Sijara Eubanks and Jessica Eye, depending on where you see Caitlin Chukagian fitting into things, as well as a fight that I'm not sure I agree with as far as matchmaking is concerned. Uriah Hall and Bevon Lewis is in the works.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, Uriah Hall is a guy that I never sleep on. He's a good counter striker. He's a good striker in general. And he dropped. People don't talk about it. In the fight against Paulo Costa, Costa went forward. He dropped him, went to both knees, stood back up. They don't count it as a knockdown if you go back and look through the metrics. But if you watch that fight, Uriah Hall had a chance in that one. And 232, I might be wrong. Is the main event for that going to be Amanda Nunes and Cyborg?
So whenever that was like formally announced on UFC Tonight, whenever they came out and said that fight was official, Karen Bryan, I believe, towards the end of talking about it, said, by the way, there is no official word yet on whether this is the main event or not. I think there's a great chance that it's going to be, but obviously the deck probably needs to unfold a little bit more for the next couple of months before they decide if you ask me right now what's most likely, I would say yes. There aren't a whole lot of potential fights, in my opinion, that make sense for what could maybe headline in front of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. And you're in the same camp as Heather Hardy, because when I talked to her, my question to her was, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think Cyborg Nunes happens before the end of this year? And what happens with Chris Cyborg next year? What does she do? Who does she fight? Because we talked about it earlier on in this episode. There's no division behind her. There's nobody she can fight. We've got this season of The Ultimate Fighter that they're looking to stack a division. I believe there's only one or two actual women's featherweights, true featherweights in that season. The rest of them are bantamweights who are moving up a weight class. So really interesting to see what's going to happen with Chris Cyborg. I think that she's going to end up fighting the Iron Lady, or the First Lady of Boxing, and Cecilia Braekhuis next summer. I think that's going to be a huge event. It's not going to draw Conor and Mayweather numbers, but I think it'd be great for women's MMA, women's boxing, and I'm really looking forward to it. So hopefully it happens.
Yeah, I agree. And Cecilia Braekhuis being like kind of like the world beater in the women's boxing side of things, I think that could be a very potentially fun matchup.